guys, it's Danny. Today we're going to be working with two orchids which are very known in the orchid hobby for creating rather unusual flower spikes. One of them is the Stanhopea orchid. This is a younger one that I just purchased. This type of orchid is very known for creating flower spikes from the bottom, as it were. So potting it up is not really a great solution for it because we would never see the blooms. And also here in the back I have a Gongora orchid which is related to the Stanhopea. This one creates pendant flower spikes. And even though conventional potting can definitely work, I did have a few instances in which the flower spikes got stuck here at the rim of the pot, and either the flower spike did not look so great, either some buds were lost. It wasn't a great situation. So today I will pot these two orchids, obviously not in pots, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about them and the setup that I have in mind. So let's start with the Gongora. Traditionally, growers use all sorts of baskets that have quite a lot of space at the bottom for the flower spikes to make their way out. And there are many types of baskets available on the market. Today though, I will use a wooden basket. This is actually a Vanda basket that Repot sent me about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years at this point. I did use it with a Vanda. I sterilized the basket with boiled water and I cleaned it and it's ready to be used once again. My plant is actually pretty young and at this stage it will not bloom, but from now on it is very possible to create flower spikes. So this pot definitely needs to go, but while they are young they can actually be grown in pots. There is no danger, it will not affect them. The only inconvenience is the flower spike. So if there's no flower spike, there's no problem. Now when it comes to baskets, no matter the type, they can be wooden baskets or wire baskets, any open air type of enclosure, the size is really not all that important. It is actually never important for orchids. However, pots tend to be a very suffocating, if you will, environment. Air circulation is minimized because of the shape of the pot. In a basket though, things are very different, so the size issue is not really an issue at all. But of course, you might want to consider the space you have available and the fact that at some point, if you're using medium, you might need to re-basket the orchid. And changing a big quantity of medium every 2 to 3 years might be rather wasteful. So try not to use a bigger size basket than you actually need to. But at the same time, don't worry too much about the exact size. So the first thing that I need to do is unpot my orchid, and I think it's potted only in sphagnum moss, so I do believe this will go fast. First of all, I'm gonna squeeze on the pot just to make the roots attached to the pot snap right off. They will not get broken. And there we go. My orchid is looking really good. So I'll take my time and remove all of this sphagnum moss. And just a side note, I made sure that the moss is thoroughly soaked before I started this because removing dry moss is really difficult and it also can damage the root system a lot more than wet sphagnum moss. So I'll go ahead and take my time in removing this moss. If I need help, I will use a pair of tweezers and I'll come back when I'm done. So I removed the vast majority of sphagnum moss from my orchid and also I applied hydrogen peroxide 3%. And if you wish to learn more about why I did that and the benefits of hydrogen peroxide, do check out my 10 tips for repotting you should know video, which I posted a little while back. It is very useful if you want to learn how to properly repot orchids. So with my orchids ready, let's talk about the medium. So because open baskets have a lot of ventilation, they are prone to actually drying out very fast. And particularly in my climate, which happens to be quite a warm one, it can be a struggle to maintain baskets moist. So my medium of choice is sphagnum moss. I might place a little bit of bark on the top to prevent algae formation, but inside the basket, I do not need to mix in any aeration materials. I will only be using New Zealand sphagnum moss. So first, I want to line the bottom. And as you can see, I am quite liberal with the sphagnum moss. And in this setup, it's not so important to make it very fluffy and airy. So I will compact it slightly on the bottom to create a sort of mesh so that the medium doesn't actually start to fall from my basket. Then I'll place my orchid inside. I want to make sure that these new growths are placed more towards the middle of the basket because from these directions the future new growths will sprout. This is the older part of the orchid. Even though it's tiny, it doesn't mean it is fresh. So I think if I position my orchid like this, I should have enough space in this basket for about 2 to 3 years. And now I will just continue with sphagnum moss around the roots. Again, I'm not worried about compacting the sphagnum moss. And as a top layer, I will place some bark chips. The bark doesn't help my orchid. It's not meant for aeration or anything of the sorts. But the top of the basket receives the most light. And being that I will try to maintain the environment a little bit damp, algae formation is inevitable. On the sides, the light doesn't really reach all that much, so I will not have a lot of algae issues here, but the top of the medium in my environment will be covered with algae. Bark does not promote algae, and it will maintain shade on the sphagnum moss so that algae will not form. And there we go, my orchid is all done. All I need to do is make sure that I put the tag back and water the orchid. Watering a basket will have to depend on your preference. If you have a large enough container, you can actually dunk the entire basket, let it soak up for 5 or 10 minutes or so, drain it and put it back in its place. Or you can just run water at the sink, or if you're growing your orchids outside, run some water with your garden hose whenever the medium feels dry and you're done. Additionally, you can also use a wire hook if you prefer to keep your orchid hanging. This is especially useful if you're growing your orchids outside, but obviously if you have a space in your home, this can be very useful as well. This setup is perfect for Stanhopea orchids because the flower spikes will have no issue just making their way down through the sphagnum moss, which is very, very fluffy. And also we have a lot of space in between the wooden bars at the bottom for the flower spikes to come out of the basket. As a side note, you can actually keep this basket as it is because it is a little bit raised. But you have to pay attention and check the underside from time to time just so you make sure that the buds have room to grow. It isn't the case for my young plant, but if you have a more mature plant, you might want to consider keeping it permanently hanging. As for the Gongora, the process is absolutely identical. I removed all of the older medium, I rinsed the root system, but this is an older orchid, and even though it's healthy, with age the older roots are starting to die off. So with this one, I need to actually go and look for dead roots and just remove them with a sterilized pair of pruners. My Stanhopea actually did not have any dead root because she was very, very young. But in this case, we can see that the velamen, if we try to pull on it, just comes right off the root and leaves a string behind. This is a clear sign that the root is not alive anymore. So I'll go around the orchid and make sure that I remove as many of these dead roots as possible. You should actually do this with any orchid you have because dead roots will start to break down in the medium and actually accelerate the degradation of the medium. So I'll go ahead and remove all of the dead roots that I see and come back when I'm done. The pot that I will use for this orchid is a carousel or orchid top pot, which is not a basket, but it's not a standard pot either. It's somewhere in between. And this is perfect for this type of orchid, which does not create flower spikes from the bottom of the pot, but rather pendant from the side. Because the orchid top pot or the carousel pot has openings all throughout its sides, which means it can provide a great deal of ventilation, but still it makes it comfortable to keep it in a home because, by all means, it is a pot. Now the tray can actually be attached back to the pot, and you can even hang the pot. So it really is a combination between a basket and a pot. And for this reason, climates which are very dry or hot generally will do much better with a much more water-retentive medium in this pot due to the amount of ventilation. It is, however, not extremely prone to staying very dry because this little tray can actually serve as a reservoir. And I shall demonstrate because my environment is warm and I'm using this as a basket with an attached reservoir. The medium that I will use is a combination between bark and moss, but I will start with sphagnum moss as a bottom layer because sphagnum moss is the material which will make sure that I can utilize the water in the reservoir or the tray. Now, because I want to prevent algae and because this pot is white and light will definitely make sure that I have algae on the sides as well, I will try to place moss in the center of the pot and bark at the outside. So you might find it a little bit contrary to what you might have heard about potting orchids, but you gotta adapt everything to your situation and your environment. So I am placing bark, as you can see, on the side of the pot, making sure that I keep my orchid in place. And then towards the core of the pot and in between the roots in the root ball, I will make sure that I have more sphagnum moss because I want to make sure the orchid still gets hydration together with this extreme ventilation and it doesn't dry out within a day. And there we go, my orchid is all potted up. Now, the smaller pieces of bark, they will fall through the ventilation slits, but just rotate the pot, lift it up, and save all of this bark, put it back in your bark container, and then just sit the pot back, rotate it, and there we go. So again, with this orchid, I tried to make sure that the newest part of the plant is situated towards the middle because this is where new growth will sprout from. And when it comes to watering, again, you have a few options. You can absolutely rotate the pot, remove the tray, and just run water at the sink if that is just enough in your environment. But I'll show you my preferred way of watering. So what I like to do is water the pot from above, making sure that I don't actually pour water in the emerging new growth, so just on the side of the pot. And as you can see, the water is caught in the tray. Well, I'm not going to dump out the water from the tray because I have a layer of sphagnum moss on the bottom of my pot. And this sphagnum moss will be so wicking that it will constantly get the water left in the tray as the water inside the pot evaporates. And because I have moss throughout this mixture, well, the water from the reservoir will travel all the way up to the top of the orchid through the sphagnum moss. And already, as we were talking, the water in my reservoir actually decreased. And this means that the sphagnum moss is already starting to absorb it. So these were my two special orchids for today, and special orchids deserve special setups. These pots can be used in various different ways with various types of materials, and they are just as good as what we've done today. The difference between all of these setups is how they work for you. Of course, if you have a very, very dry or very warm environment and you fill a basket or an orchid top pot with just bark, you might not have a great time with it, because it might dry out within a day or two for you, and maybe you don't have time to water. But if you add a little bit of sphagnum moss, things would be so much better. And the reverse is also possible. If things stay way too wet for you, go for less water retentive materials, such as bark, charcoal, try out lava rock if you want to try out something inorganic, or a combination between all of these materials. Something will work for you. All you have to do is find that something. And don't limit yourself to the conventional setups, because conventional setups don't work for all orchids, as we can see in the case of our little Stanhopea here, which makes me very excited because I've never seen a Stanhopea flower in real life, and they are amazing and very fragrant. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I will keep you up to date with these orchids. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and you will find these products, of course, linked down below in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!